No, it'll work. So this is the only ventilator that we have that has Neo software. So this is the vent that the vent returns will be on, okay? You'll get it from 0, so you'll have to plug it into the high pressure air and oxygen outlets. You should always plug it in, obviously. In a hospital setting, it should be plugged into a red outlet. You'll get it just like this. So you'll have to turn it on, which is this green arrow here. Green button, it's not an arrow at all. It does its whole setup. If I can find the actual Neo expiratory valve, I'll have you do the check off, which if I don't find it by next week, we won't do it all, but we're having no such luck finding the Neo expiratory valve at this current moment in time. So the Neo CPAP setup. So you verify physician order for appropriateness. All of those things that we talked about as indications or contraindications for a nasal CPAP. So CO2 higher than what?
60.
60 pH less than what?
7.25.
725. Okay. If your patient has a bilateral choanal atresia, meaning that they have that bony protuberance at the back of their nares and they're not capable of breathing through their nose, this is not appropriate. Patient that is completely apneic, not appropriate. All of those things that we talked about in class for appropriateness for this is something you should identify. Review the patient chart for significant findings. Does this patient have a CDH that we know about and makes non-invasive a not compatible form of their disease process? Do you know that they have a pneumothorax? And maybe we want to look at that more into how much pressure we're going to use, things like that, okay? Identify and gather the necessary equipment that you need for the event. You need the high pressure hoses, you need the circuitry. This is a neonate circuit. This is the size of the neonate circuit. As you can see, it's smaller than the adult and or the pediatric circuitry. Currently, I don't have a heater on here because we didn't have a spare heater. I should have taken it off that one, but I was trying not to, yada, yada, yada. So there will be a heater on here for the next time, but this vent labels inspiratory and expiratory limbs. We'll use this double filter process. Not all hospitals do that, but for our purposes, we'll do that for our lab. It'll be hooked up into the actual heater wires as well. You'll have to plug them in and then get the neonate supplies. Like I said, and I'll pass them around, there's a variety of nasal prongs. The ones that we'll use for our return are the ones that will come in this box. So just so you guys you don't have to memorize all the different kinds of prongs. I just want you to be able to apply them. The prongs that you use is dependent on wherever you work, okay? So I just want you guys to see this, be able to set up the ventilator. So inside of here are all of these pieces, minus these, which come with the vent. So all of these pieces are in this, as well as the hat, the little foam squishy guys, they'll all come inside of there, and I'll put that packaging with the informational thing right here where all the other lab supplies are if you wanted or needed to practice. It'll come all separated, so I suggest when you have time or the chance to practice, you take them all apart and put them all back together. So you've gathered all the supplies. We've determined that these are the correct size of prongs for this patient. There are little discs that I'm gonna try to get for our class that can help you measure the actual patient's nair size, so you can choose the correct prong size before you even go to the patient bedside, instead of bringing all of the different sizes to the bedside to see which one fits. So you turn the vent on and it comes into the screen. You have to choose new neonate, and you always have to click the accept button, which is the rotary dial, by pushing it in. And it'll change over to the NICU vent settings, which we can identify because there is the little baby up here in the corner. Yes? So if we want to make any changes, it all happens with the rotary dial and or the touch screen. So down here in the left-hand bottom corner, it says vent settings. So we're going to click on vent settings. Here are all the different modes that are offered for this ventilator. and we're gonna go to the SPN, so spontaneous CPAP/pressure support. Click on that, and you have to click accept. So then we want to, as you can see, we're still in standby, so we're still putting in the settings. For, like I said, for our course, we'll look at and use the core settings and not any of the extraneous that are very specific to this ventilator, like the slope. So for us, I'll have you set an FiO2. You'll set a PEEP. We'll leave pressure support for CPAP at 0, which means that it's just applying a CPAP. We'll leave slope at the predetermined 0.1. And then Tmax is actually the maximum inspiratory time. And usually what that is used for is if your patient has a leak within the circuit, it'll kind of limit the amount of time that the breath can happen. And like I said, usually in NICU, it's for a leak. So we'll actually just put that down to like 0.3. And then you always have to click to accept. Now we put in the settings. I'll give you the settings that I want you to put in. You don't have to predetermine what you think is appropriate in the setting. So we've put in our settings that we would like. Now we click to apply. It still is in standby, so you have to click start ventilation. And sorry, click. So then you can see it has identified, the mode that you're in up here. So we're in the spontaneous CPAP mode. Sounds like it's gonna explode, but all of your actual settings are down here, and you can click and change them straight from the home screen if you see necessary, but you always have to click the accept button. Okay? So, because I only have this on a test lung, it's actually gonna work for me. So right now, what is the CPAP that we're applying or supplying to the patient?
It's fine.
Hold on, I went into apnea. I'm sorry. Right. See that?
I don't think that is pressure support.
No. Hold on. Excuse me.
What are we looking for?
CPAP?
Oh, I see it.
Where is it?
I'm just kidding.
Where is it? Oh, so it's the P
Barb
mean?
just closed it.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Okay, good. She did. Not gonna blow anything up, but probably. So here, it's reading the mean, but you can also see that the PEEP being applied right here on the pressure waveform is at 5.
So you're asking what the CPAP was?
Yeah, CPAP/PEEP, same thing.
Okay.
Looking at the vent right now, what's the patient's respiratory rate?
39, 38.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of tidal volume is it sensing?
It's all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of stuff, agreed. And CPAP, it's a little trickier. So, one thing you'll notice that is different on this circuit that you will probably never see on an adult circuit is this. It's the expiratory flow sensor. It is connected between the vent Y and the patient ET tube. And it measures tidal volume/flow right here at the patient Y, as opposed to all the way back here at the ventilator. Just because their tidal volumes are so small, their actual flow change is significantly smaller than it is in adults. It's important to monitor as close to the patient as you possibly can.
Because by the time he gets over there, it'll
Yes,
be
it
way
can be
smaller.
completely washed out.
They have those at Northwest Community? The flow sensors.
They do or they
use
don't?
them. They
Adults
do.
or peds?
Adults.
Adults, it's the worst. It gets clogged with secretions all the time. How often are you taking that thing out, clicking it on the thing to clear it?
No, they just have it on there. You just suction. They never take it out.
Does it work, I mean?
Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah.
I'm
Put
surprised.
that
Hamilton or
Yeah, they
yeah,
use
the
it.
Hamilton.
Is it? I don't know which one. I know they have it though, cause it's when we set the vents. Huh? I don't know. Okay, never mind. Go see.
Because the Hamilton, the
Is
full
it-
sensor is in.
Cause I asked and they said it's a full sensor.
Okay, so next time are you there now?
Yeah, I'm
So next time you're there, look, is it hooked up to the ventilator or is it hooked up to the patient monitor? Because it might be an end tidal monitor.
No, it's to the ventilator.
It's to the
not-
vent?
Yeah, it's not to
Good for them. The only experience I've ever had with adults in a pulse sensor was horrid. Okay, so we'll go into alarms. And on the alarms, in general, I would say as a working practice for CPAP in the NICU, most of the alarms are off except for like the apnea and then the pressure, because we want to make sure that we're continually applying the pressure that we want to have applied. But frequently, people will shut off all the other alarms just because the tidal volume and the minute volume can be significantly lost from the patient's mouth. We don't have a complete circuit in that, like, the prongs only take up 60 to 90% of the nair, so you can get significant leakage from there. So for our class, I will tell you what alarms I want you to set. I just want you to be mindful, like, you have to tell me, like, I'm gonna set these alarms. And I'll tell you, like, okay, go ahead and set the apnea alarm, go ahead and set the pressure alarm, like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions on the nasal CPAP setup?
What part was it that you wanted us to take apart and put back together to practice?
The prongs, the actual prongs.
The okay, I see.
Yeah. So then we've hooked everything up that we need to hook up. We have identified the correct size of the nasal prongs. We've gone to the bedside, we've cleaned our hands, we've introduced ourselves to the family. Should just leave it in an apnea setting. So we've introduced our family, we're introduced ourselves to the family, we're gonna tell them what we're gonna do, connect the CPAP up to the high pressure, the electrical outlet, assemble the circuit. Like I said, as far as the operational procedure, like the whole setup depends on whether I can actually find the Neo flow meter. I'll let you know by next week. If we don't have it, we'll completely omit that step. We'll initiate CPAP. I'll tell you the settings, the CPAP, the FiO2 level. What would we use as our assessment to know that we have put on or set the correct setup for our patient? What are we using to identify that this is appropriate for our patient?
Baby, CPG.
Some sort of gas, okay. What else?
X-ray.
X-ray. Mm-hmm. What else?
Breath sounds.
Breath sounds. What else?
Work of breathing.
Worker breathing, pulse ox, absolutely. What are the two major complications with non-invasive ventilation? Talked about them in class. We touched on them in
Air
lunch lab.
resistance, it goes down the stomach.
Low lungs and lungs.
I mean, that's those are possibilities, but complications.
They die.
Of course, always a complication, but specific to non-invasive.
If they have point on
That's a
No, this is
contraindication.
complications. So like skin breakdown and or over distension causing some sort of volute/barotrauma. So those are the two biggest complications to non-invasive ventilation.
So skin breakdown and then what?
Over distension,
Like it's going in their esophagus, right?
no, over distension of their airways,
Oh.
of their lungs. No, this is non-invasive ventilation. So you would monitor that like with the chest x-ray if you see in the morning like the patient's really over distended in their lungs. Maybe it's time to back off some of the CPAP or try a different device.
How do you know if they're over distended by looking at X-ray? I mean, do they look super like huge or?
So there's a normal expansion to the rib,
Oh, okay.
and you would actually count the ribs. Work breathing. Okay, so We're using SATs, color, workup breathing, chest x-ray, breath sounds, all to identify if this is the appropriate settings for our patient. What if they still have an increased workup breathing even after we put them on, say, 5 of non-invasive? What do you think we should do? So they're still retracting, they still have nasal flaring.
Crank it up some more.
Okay, crank what up?
You increase the
The
pressure support
CPAP,
to
the,
There's no pressure
reduce
support.
the work of breathing.
There's no pressure support.
Oh, sorry.
So then we'll go to, we would
FiO2?
change the amount of PEEP, right?
Oh, okay.
So adults, you'd probably go from 5 to 7 or 10 even. For kids, or for especially neonates, which is this return, we'd only go to like 6. We'd only increase by 1 and reevaluate,
Okay.
okay? I would say depending, 7 or 8 would probably be about the maximum amount of CPAP. That's quite a bit of CPAP. Any other questions?
Do hospitals go over that sometimes?
Not really.
Okay.
Whenever you make a change to the vents, when do you reassess? After 20 minutes?
No, you should reassess immediately, but like as far as a gas,
Yeah.
I would say 30 minutes, 20 if the patient's really tenuous. Okay, so we've assessed that this is the appropriate level of CPAP and FiO2. We adjusted the alarms depending on the device, established the baseline monitoring, like we said, with the saturation. We auscultated and determined that this was the appropriate settings for our patient. Evaluated the work of breathing, evaluated the ventilation via ABG, transcutaneous monitoring, and pulse oximetry, evaluated the heart rate and blood pressure, evaluated the chest x-ray periodically. Most places will do it just once a day. Evaluated the nasal septum. I usually did this the very beginning of my shift. I would literally take the prongs out just slightly, so I can actually see the septum, see if there's any skin breakdown. Is it all okay in there? Sorry. No, you're fine. And then I also actually looked at the prongs, because the prongs can get very boogery, and you want to make sure that those are still patent, and I might give the patient like just a quick little nasal suction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then we're going to wash our hands and record any relevant data in the patient chart and provide any suggestions. What do you think suggestions might be in this non-invasive ventilation mode?
Periodically check the skin for breakdown.
Sure, so like the suggestion might be using specific things to help protect the skin. Other suggestions might be like, okay, I put this patient on CPAP of 5 and they still were retracting. I suggest that we increase it or try a different mode. Or if you see that the patient's not tolerating it at all, like they're just clawing at their face, like maybe we suggest like making the patient more comfortable by, something else, another device or something like that. Does that make sense? Those would basically be the only suggestions I can really think of. All right, questions? So then that's the Neo CPAP setup. Okay, so